Oh, yeah. Hey, this is Mark Phillips, and welcome to another episode of Better PR Now. I'm just back from Chicago, where I attended the Podcast Movement 2016. What an amazing experience. About 2,000, maybe more participants, crazy good speakers, all kinds of positive energy. And I tell you what, there was more support and love there than any conference I've been to recently. Oh, and when the conference's administrative notes, which are normally pretty boring, like where the bathrooms are and what to expect on the schedule, when they're delivered as a slow jam by three really talented performers, you know you're in for something great. So Podcast Movement was fantastic. I'm not going to do a recap of the whole conference. What I wanted to do, though, was pull out some of the lessons, some of the tips and tricks that the speakers shared that could be really good PR lessons that we could apply in our practice every day as professional communicators. So don't worry about taking notes. I'll include links to all the great people and resources that I mentioned in this episode on the website at betterprnow.com/PM16. So setting the stage. Why would we even want to consider using podcasting for public relations? Well, Jay Baer, who is president of Convince and Convert, also a keynote speaker and a podcaster and an author of 5 books, including Hug Your Haters, How to Embrace Complaints and Keep Your Customers. Jay put together some 2016 podcast statistics, and I think they're pretty convincing. So, number one, podcast listening grew 23% between 2015 and 2016. So 21% of Americans over age 12 have listened to a podcast in the past month. That's up 17% since last year. Monthly podcast listenership has also increased 75% since 2013. The second statistic, the podcast audience really is bigger than you think. The same number, and this really floored me, the same number of Americans listen to podcasts as those that use Twitter. 21%. So I know what you're thinking. There's way more people on Twitter than listen to podcasts. Well, you're right. There are more than 57 million Americans listen to podcasts, and they consume an average of 5 podcasts per week per listener. And Twitter has many more members signed up than that. But the actual number of people who are active users of Twitter is still about equal to the number of people who listen to podcasts. So when you consider that, podcasting has the same footprint as Twitter. The other thing that you need to take into account is that podcasts are enduring. So when you record a podcast or you're interviewed on a podcast or your company, your brand is featured in a podcast, that stays in iTunes, it stays on the website, it stays in all the distribution platforms for perpetuity, as opposed to Twitter, where it goes out and then it's quickly buried by other tweets. So the long-term value of being in a podcast is actually much greater than Twitter, and the reach ends up being even better. So the third statistic is that mobility is driving podcast growth. This year, 64% of podcasts are being listened to on a smartphone or tablet. So people are listening on the go, and this consumption creates opportunities for us to engage our publics during their commutes, working out, walking the dog, or in other places where they're not in front of their computer. And of course, they can actually still listen on their computer. Just most people are starting to listen on mobile devices. So to get this started, I'd actually like to go to the very end of the conference. Alex Blumberg, who is somebody you've probably heard of, provided the closing keynote. And you might have listened to some of his work on NPR as he produced This American Life. He also co-hosted the Planet Money podcast and co-founded Gimlet Media, which has launched some of the most popular podcasts around. During his talk, Alex shared incredibly poignant examples of the power of audio for both good and evil. He discussed the use of radio in the Nazis' rise to power in pre-war Germany, and the role of radio in driving genocide in Rwanda. He also shared how audio can bring people together, how it can create empathy and a sense of community. He talked about audio being the most intimate medium, much more so than print or video. And why do you think this is? Well, in print, when you're reading a novel, for example, your mind fills in the blanks, and you sort of paint a picture, a mental picture for yourself. In video, you don't have to do that, and so it's right there. So you don't feel as much of a connection. Just like with print, when you listen to audio, your brain fills in the details. You get a mental picture, but you're also hearing the voices. You're hearing the emotion, you're hearing the breath, You're hearing things that give you more clues than you get just reading. And there's a psychological dynamic that's going on where the sound of the voice, and the more you listen to it, ends up creating a sense of intimacy. And so it's very real. You feel like you know the people that you're listening to. And so what happens when people listen to audio, particularly like with a podcast, the listener fills in the blanks and they hear the voice, they hear the breath, they hear the pauses, they feel the emotion, and they come away with a sense that they actually know the speaker. That's why it's so powerful when you're looking to build a relationship with your publics, looking to build a sense of community. So if you're considering using podcasting for yourself, for your own brand, for the company that you work for, or for your clients, podcasting really is a great way to start to build a sense of community and build engagement with your publics. So let's dive right into some of the other key points. Another of the keynote speakers was Kevin Smith, who you might know from having produced movies such as Clerks, Mallrats, and Jay and Silent Bob. He also is on Comic Book Men on AMC Network, and so much more. What you might not know is that Kevin is also a longtime podcaster, being one of the earliest adopters of this new medium. Kevin created the Smodcast Network, which delivers a really crazy range of weekly podcasts from Kevin and his friends, including Hollywood Babylon, Smodcast, Jay and Silent Bob Get Old, Fat Man on Batman, it's one of my favorites, Edumacation, Talk Salad and Scrambled Eggs. The network also features Tell 'em Steve Dave, FEAB, I Sell Comics, Waking from the American Dream, Netheads, Nooner, Secret Stash, The Wayne Foundation, The Last Week on Earth with Brian Glebe, and Pod U. These guys are just crazy prolific. So Kevin delivered a really incredible keynote. He was booked to speak for about an hour. He went 90 minutes. I don't think he took a breath, and it was just absolutely amazing. So some of the key takeaways from his discussion of producing podcasts, and as well as working with AMC on their series, and with writing, directing, and producing the movies that he's worked on, was do what you love doing, express yourself, and that really was the foot stomper for him. Express yourself. Be open for unexpected opportunities. So many of these opportunities came up and they were not planned. Only one of the movies they intended to do. The rest just sort of emerged organically. Same thing with their involvement with AMC. So be open for unexpected opportunities. And then be willing to put yourself out there. That means being exposed to ridicule, running the risk of failure, and putting yourself outside your comfort zone. A number of the speakers talked about real growth coming when you're willing to step outside your comfort zone. So two other speakers were the ladies from BuzzFeed's Another Round. That was Heben Nagatu and Tracy Clayton. They also really stressed that it's important to be yourself. And the key thing, and this is really important for public relations and other communications professionals, is to ask the questions that you really want to ask. Don't beat around the bush. For example, they revealed how they got Hillary Clinton to get off script, get off the talking points, and simply connect as a regular human being. It's an incredibly funny, insightful listen, and you'll find the link in the show notes. Pat Flynn, founder of the Smart Passive Income podcast and a really amazing guy in his own right, stressed the importance of relationships. We get really wrapped up with how many downloads we have, how many visits we have to our website, how many followers we have on Instagram and Twitter and other platforms. And Pat's message was that downloads are people. They're not just numbers. Downloads are your community. He said that if you had only 100 downloads, imagine that's 100 people who are gathered in one room to listen to you. 100 downloads as a number on your screen doesn't look like much, but 100 people gathered together to listen to you is incredibly powerful. And that's where your community comes from. So Pat's point about podcasting can be a platform for creating and engaging a community of people that you're connected to, or connected to your brand, or connected to your mission, is right on. And speaking of Pat, he said something that also struck a chord with me. He said to change someone's life, first change their day. Well, how do you do that? In Pat's words, give them something of value. In fact, give value first, whether it's a few minutes of entertainment or a helpful tip to make their life easier. It's a simple idea that we so often forget. Give first. Jessica Rhodes, host of Roads to Success podcast, said to leverage podcasts just like you would any other media outlet. Make it easy for podcasters to feature you on their shows. Reach out with a one-sheet that includes a good headshot, a bio written in the third person that the podcaster can use as an introduction on the show, link to your online presence, whether it's website or social platforms, ideally both, your contact information, including your phone number and Skype, and make sure that your client or your content is a good fit for the show's audience. Josh Elledge of Upend PR in Orlando, Florida, also provided some great tips to both launch your own podcast and leverage the channels that others have created. Josh highlighted the importance of building relationships with podcasters before asking to be on their show. For anyone who has worked in media relations, you'll recognize a familiar theme in that it's important to build relationships with journalists, editors, and producers before you need them or they need you. The same is true for podcasters. Follow those who cover your industry or interests, connect with them on Twitter or other social media platforms, like and share their shows, and comment on their material. You know, we're all looking for feedback and engagement, so proactively reaching out to them will go a long way toward building a mutually beneficial relationship. As Josh said, give freely and allow influencers to reward you freely. Josh recommended making sure that your profile is up to date on all platforms, including Twitter and LinkedIn in particular, so that podcasters, and journalists for that matter, can find you easily. Speaking of Twitter, this is a terrific platform for making an initial contact and providing support to podcasters you would like to engage. Follow them, retweet what they tweet, and throw some love by promoting their podcasts. You'll be surprised at how grateful they'll be. Okay, here's a key piece of advice from Josh, and I'm going to really foot stomp this. Use HARO. It's also called Help a Reporter Out, and I'll have the link in the show notes. It's owned by Cision, and it's an essential way for journalists and podcasters to find you or your clients. Once you sign up, you'll get 3 emails a day between Monday and Friday, and when you see a request that fits with your business, send them a pitch. It's that easy. If you're a podcaster, register as a journalist, and you'll be able to use the service to find experts to interview. Be sure to follow their rules for journalists, though. Listen, if you're not already registered on HARO, hit the pause button right now. Go to www.helpareporter.com and register yourself or your client. It's okay. I'll wait. Go ahead. Okay, great. So we're all back. I want to talk a little bit about emotion and storytelling and how critically important they are. Daniel Lewis of the Audacity to podcast pointed out that it's important to keep things positive because the emotion you convey through your podcast appearance is the emotion you'll attract. If you're going to start your own podcast or one for your organization or client, it'd be a really great idea to pay attention to Gretchen Rubin's rules for creating a podcast. You'll know Gretchen from her books, The Happiness Project, Happier at Home, Better Than Before, and others, as well as her conversation with Oprah Winfrey on Super Soul Sunday. Some of Gretchen's key points included being clear about what we're doing, whether we're entertaining, informing, teaching, advocating, or doing something else. It's important to understand and keep in mind what our main purpose is. She also said to remember that our listeners have 4 basic desires that we can fulfill. They have a hunger for stories. They have a desire for companionship. They also have a desire to learn, and that's where research, analysis, books, and vocabulary can come in. And she said they have a desire for ease of listening, so make it sound good. She said to be approachable and transparent. The more we reveal ourselves, the more others want to engage with us. Show some vulnerability. She said to let your freak flag fly. Be specific about your experiences. Really share. And play to your own idiosyncrasies. After all, that's what people identify with, and that's how you draw closer. She said to build an engaged community. It's good to have fans, but it's so much better to have a community of people that like what you do, care about you, and engage with you. This really is true for business and for life. She recommended connecting with listeners in as many ways as possible. She advised that a strong voice repels as well as attracts. Essentially, you're not going to appeal to everybody, and that's okay. As long as you appeal to and are able to communicate with and build a relationship with those who are most interested in what you do, in what your business does, or in your mission, that's what's most important. She said to try to leave people wanting more, and she reiterated what Alex had said about podcasting creating a really deeply intimate connection. Towards the end, Cliff Ravenscraft, podcast producer, consultant, and coach, and host of the Podcast Answer Man podcast, gave some really great words of advice. He focused on strategies to ensure your podcast ranks highly on iTunes or other distribution channels. He said to have a clear message. The example he used was the Ray Edwards Show. He said to create consistent, compelling content and suggested that you publish at least once a week to keep your audience engaged. Like many of the speakers, Cliff urged everybody to be passionate about the content you create. Don't go into an area just because somebody said you ought to. Go into it because you really, really are passionate about it. Focus on quality sound and artwork. We've heard that before. And be yourself. He also advised to build relationships with your audience. And as you've heard me say many times, it really is all about relationships. Cliff recommended engaging with your audience's content by asking questions. Ask for their tips, their ideas, and their criticisms. The more you understand their pain points, the better you'll be able to engage with them about things that are most important to them. Finally, he said to provide hope, encouragement, and feedback to others who are in your line of work or who share similar interests. Business and life coach Dana Garrison said to be willing to move outside your comfort zone. We've heard this as well from other speakers, and it really does apply. In fact, Dana wears a set of cat ears at all of her appearances because that's a reminder to herself to always be willing to step outside your comfort zone. So this applies to starting a podcast. It also applies to experimenting with live video streaming or pretty much any part of life. There was so much more great information shared at Podcast Movement 2016, but I do want to keep it short and drivable, so I'm going to wrap it up. I'd love to hear what you think about the ideas I shared in this episode. Give me a shout by clicking the orange Send Voicemail tab on the right side of every page of the BetterPRNow.com website. It's a quick and really is an easy way to participate in this ongoing conversation. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and tell a friend who might also be interested. One last note on Podcast Movement. This was an incredibly helpful experience for me, and I was blown away by the sheer volume of information that was shared freely, and by the way, everyone there supported each other. It was incredibly positive. If you're podcasting now or you're considering starting, I'd highly recommend that you attend next year's Podcast Movement, which will be August 23 to 25, 2017 in Anaheim, California. And one more thing. I'd like to ask a personal favor. My wife and I are expecting the birth of our first grandchild in a few weeks, so will you keep our daughter, her baby, and her husband in your thoughts and prayers? I'd really appreciate it. So that's it for this episode. Thanks for taking this journey with me as we improve public relations one conversation at a time. I'll catch you on the next episode.